Hello, my name is LoG, and welcome to part 3 of this modern rhythm power-up. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get on to the lesson. All right, for this last part of this power-up, it's going to be pretty much the same thing that we did in the previous one, just different levels of dynamics. So in the previous part, we talked about the lowest level of dynamics, and that was with the dead notes, like that. Then we went over the second level of dynamics where we were letting certain notes ring out, the notes right before the hammer-on, mixed with some palm mutes. And we talked about that kind of hand bouncing motion to achieve that sound a little easier. This time we're going to talk about filling out the chord shape so that it's a little fuller sounding. We've got some more notes as well as some more kind of rhythmic dead notes that we can play. So this will be level 3. And what we're going to do here is actually change the chord shape. The bass chord shape is going to be pretty much the same for this first one. It's going to look just like that. But we're eventually going to also add in 2 more notes. So the full chord is going to look like that. So after that hammer on, and this is at the very last pick of each of those little mini groups of the main part that we were talking about. So if you think about it, that's that last little pick, and then we do, that's that last little pick again. For those last little picks, the very last hit of each of those 2 small little groups of the larger 5-beat group, we're going to be doing a little chord hit. And this is going to be with an upstroke. So it's going to be different than how we've been playing it so far. So far, we've been really just doing this all with downstrokes. But we're going to sneak in an upstroke right here to bring out some of these extra notes of the chord shapes. So the first chord is going to look like this. Still B, we're just adding in the 3rd on the D string and the 7th on the G string. So the chord looks like this. Our root, 3rd, 7, and we're going to be playing that 5th down here as well. So it'll look like this. Like that. So right after that first hammer, or excuse me, right after the second hammer on, I'm moving my fingers down to grab those higher notes. So if I play that slow, you can see my ring finger prepping the 7th right there. That's the 3rd fret of the G string. And then my pointer finger moving down from this 3rd on the D string to the other 3rd on the other D string. So, and we're simply just hitting that little chord hit. It's going to be the same for every single chord that we hit. Right at the end of each of those little mini parts of the larger riff, that last little pick after the hammer-on. So also this is with an upstroke, and then in between, where so far we've always been pausing in between the small groups like this, pause, pause, like that. What we're going to do now is instead of pausing, we're going to fill it with 2 little dead notes, a downstroke and an upstroke. That's going to sound like this. I'll play it slow. Like that, right? So it gives it a little more of like a, I don't know, a little more busy groove type of thing when we add those little dead notes. So what's the difference here between level 2? Or I'll just go through all of them. Level 1 was dead notes, right? Level 2 was bringing out those notes right before the hammer-on, so we're playing those open, no palm muting. And then everything else is palm muted. You can, of course, experiment with adding dead notes in there for sure if you want. Maybe like, that's adding in some dead notes in between, which is kind of cool. And then level 3 is the same exact thing. We're just adding in that little chord hit at the last pick of each little mini group. So like this. Like that. And adding in a little down-up dead note in between or during those pauses. Etc. So that's the next one. This one is exactly the same shape, my middle finger pointer ring, just like I was down here, middle finger pointer ring. The only difference is I'm going to start exactly the same with this pointer finger pinky hammer on, right? Like we've been doing this whole time, except when I ditch it, I can just leave the chord here because I'm just going back and forth between the open D string and the pinky right there. So that looks like this. Right, I'll play that in its entirety. Right, and then that brings us to the next chord. So again, this chord looks exactly the same as that one, right? Except we're playing the open D string as the note we're bouncing back and forth from. The rest of the notes are the same thing. This is D's 5, 1, 3, and 7. So A, D, F sharp, C sharp. Pretty straightforward. Next one is going to be kind of a thicker B flat minor. So all we're doing here is we're barring fully pretty much every string on this B flat, and then we're adding in the B flats 2 right there, the ring finger, adding in the 4, and then the flat 7 right there. So it's a pretty easy little chord shape. We're just kind of barring, and again, hammering on the pinky right here. So this looks like this. Right, so we're kind of playing, in this case, I'm kind of shooting for the B string and kind of doing an upstroke on the B string, G string, and D string. But if you snag the high string, it will work fine. It's like a super thick minor chord. That's that one. And then the last one again, let me just so you can see what that chord looks like. So ring finger there, G string is under the bar, middle finger is on the B string right there. Pretty straightforward. It's like a B flat suspended type chord until we hammer on, then it's minor. And then for the next chord, we move here, and it's exactly the same as we've been doing. Kind of that D major, accenting that 7 right there with the hammer on, except the chord is now going to be this. We're pretty much playing for this higher chord hit. We're playing what looks like pretty much a power chord on the F sharp on the A string. So F sharp, C sharp, F sharp like that, while hammering on that 11th fret D string, the C sharp. So that's going to look like this. And I'm also adding in, whenever I'm playing a D chord, so it's not the first one, but the second chord is D, and not the third one, and the fourth chord is D. Whenever I'm hitting the D, I'm actually kind of freely once in a while trying to add in the open high strings, the E and the B, because that's Ds 2 and 6, which sound kind of cool. So with this chord right here, that was that D major with the open strings on top. Pretty cool sounding chord. And if I play the D major right here, open strings on top, also cool. So right, I'm trying to sneak in those open strings. If you don't want them, you can just play the normal chord on top, and that's cool as well. So let's recap all of those chord hits. So we've got, this is the first one, the B, right? We're playing our root, 3rd, 7th, and for the B, we're hammering on back and forth from this low 3rd to the 5th right there. Now, if you notice, when I'm doing that the little chord hit, I am moving my pointer finger to play that 3rd. You don't necessarily have to. You can just keep your finger the whole time. There's nothing wrong with that. I kind of, for some reason, like to do it. It just feels better for my hand. I don't know. But you don't have to do that. You can just keep the bar down the whole time if you want. Next one is the same thing, except after that first initial hammer on from the 3rd to the 5th of D, we're after that lifting up and playing the open D back and forth to the A right there. Just like that. Back here, here's our B flat minor chord one more time. Like that. This is simply a bar with the ring finger on the D string and middle finger on the B string, hammering on like normal. Pretty much play every string with that one if you want to. And then finally the D up top, which looks like an F sharp power chord, which is D's 3, 7, and then 3 again. And I'm hammering on to the 7, to the 7. And we continue. Again, adding in those little down up dead notes in between the parts of the pattern. So let me play that. Whoops. It's really important to get those little dead notes in there because this part, this level 3 dynamic, is very different than the others, and it really comes from that little down up dead stroke or dead note in there. So keep that in mind. Make sure you're throwing those in there. So then for the last level of dynamic, the 4th level, the biggest level, all we're doing is holding that chord hit for that entire length. So instead of hitting it one time real fast with an upstroke and then doing 2 little dead notes, we're holding it the whole time. So that sounds like this. Whereas the other one, I was doing, of course, some dead notes. Not anymore. Excuse me. So that's the idea for that last level. You just hold that chord hit to really let it ring out. Make sure the chord shape is in your hand so you're getting everything clean. I'm doing that with an upstroke. The reason why I'm doing that is I kind of find it a little bit easier to bring out those high notes because those are the first notes you're hitting, as opposed to if you did a downstroke, you'd be hitting the low notes first. It's just something I like. If you like to do this with a downstroke for that big hit, something like this, like that's a downstroke. There's nothing wrong with that. I kind of like the kind of spike of high notes that you get when you do a quick little upstroke like that. So that's what I'm doing for this one. But that's pretty much it for this part. So this is just going to be those first two levels, or the levels we just went through. So level 3, level 4, and that's going to be adding in these little chord shapes with the dead notes, and then level 4 is letting the chords ring. So it's really just memorizing the chord shapes, and then you'll be good to go. So this one is also going to run from 90 to 100, and then 110. And once you have everything down, over the final video, we'll run all of these levels over the same sorts of tracks at different tempos. So let's get on to these backing tracks. All right, that does it for part 3 of this modern rhythm power-up. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, and I'll see you all in the final part.